Hello, everyone, and welcome to this, the second of the week's lectures on the French disease. I almost said syphilis there, but as you'll recall, I've refrained from using this term because it is not what the peoples of Europe called the new disease that swept across their lands in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. As we learned last time, one of our goals as historians is to get inside the heads of the people we're studying. Doing this means using the language of the past, and if we do that, we'll be in a much better position when it comes to answering questions about past generations' responses to illness. Indeed, as social constructionists argue, inhabiting the mental space of our subjects helps us see the attitudes, values, and ideologies that shape the way societies define and deal with disease. And as we saw last time, one of the cultural preoccupations that shaped the construction of the French disease in early modern Europe was religion. From the very beginning of this epidemic, Europeans saw this new illness as a form of divine punishment. That is, as something God had deliberately infected people with on account of their sinful behavior. This belief that it was a kind of divine vengeance can be seen not only in European explanations of what caused the French disease, but also, interestingly, in sick people's therapeutic actions. All across Europe, during the 1500s, one of the most popular forms of treatment for this awful pox was to travel to sites of religious healing and pray directly to God. You can see one example of this in the image on the slide, where a group of infected individuals are kneeling in front of Saint Minas, the patron saint of the French disease. Other sufferers prayed to Saint Denis for healing, and sometimes travelers prayed to the Virgin Mary herself for protection against the French disease. So, given all of this, we have to ask, why was syphilis viewed in such a religious light in early modern Europe? In answering this question, our gut instinct might be to just lay all of this at the feet of Christianity itself. After all, we might ask, hasn't Christianity, from its very beginnings, had a quite negative, pessimistic outlook on sex, which is seen as corrupting and is associated with all kinds of moral temptations? And given this, wouldn't it be entirely logical for Western Christendom to see any sexually transmitted disease as sinful in nature? These are good points, and I think that they do get us partway to an answer. Certainly, the fact that Christianity sees sex as something potentially wrong probably laid the groundwork for Europe's response to the French disease. However, there's also more to it than this. Remember, if we want to be good social constructionists, and I hope we do, we have to get into the nitty-gritty. That is, we have to try to get a detailed, on-the-ground look at the specific circumstances of the times and places we're studying. So, what was going on in Europe at the specific moment this new disease appeared? What about the particular conditions of European societies at this exact moment in time prompted them to believe that the French disease was divine vengeance? This is what we're going to try to figure out today. And in getting at this, one of the first things I want to say here is that for Europeans, the late 15th and early 16th century was a period of apocalyptic expectations. For many living through these years, it seemed as if the last days were near and that the second coming of Christ was imminent. This feeling that the end times had come was a result of numerous crises, and many of these were religious in nature. Throughout this period, European Christians perceived threats to their faith from within and without. On the outside, the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453, which signaled the end of the Byzantine Empire and consequently of Eastern Christianity, worried many Western Europeans who feared that their own civilization might one day soon be defeated by invading Muslim armies. Christians of the West interpreted the fall of Constantinople as evidence of God's disfavor with them. Religious leaders told their congregations that the success of the Ottoman invasions was God's doing, something God had allowed to happen on account of his desire to punish Christians for their moral backsliding. Within Italy, Christian priests preached that the Ottoman march on their lands would continue until people ceased their evil ways and returned to the church. The overall message was quite apocalyptic. Consider a book published in 1495 by the guy you see on the screen here, the Florentine friar Girolamo Savonarola. In his text, Savonarola talks about how in 1489 he had begun to interpret the book of Revelation in the city's churches, and you can read the excerpt from his book that I've printed here on the screen. Basically, he is convinced that God is going to send a great scourge, scourge being another word for a disease, over all of Italy. And why was this? Because of the increasingly sinful behavior of the Italian people. As Almighty God saw the sins of Italy multiply, he wrote, God was unable to bear it any longer and decided to cleanse his church with a great scourge. Of course, this scourge was the French disease, or as it was rendered in Latin, the morbus gallicus. Soon, other cultural authorities joined Savonarola in interpreting the Great Pox in this manner. Some made direct links to the troubles in the East. Speaking in 1499, for example, Corradino Gilino, the court physician in Ferrara, argued that both the new disease and recent Turkish military advances were acts of God, who, as he put it, full of wrath against us for our dreadful sins, sent this savage plague. You can read the full text of Galino's statement on the screen right here. As this supposedly divine disease seeped out of Italy into other European lands, its religious meaning became even more amplified. A 1496 account by a Frenchman named Jean Molyneux notes how, while some call this abominable sickness the Great Pox, others called it Le Fibre Saint Job, that is, the fever of Saint Job. Job, you may know, is the central figure of the Book of Job, one of the books of the Old Testament from the Bible. In the story, God allows Satan to visit a series of misfortunes upon Job, and one of these is a horrible skin disease that leaves Job covered in sores. Medieval theologians prior to this period believed that the disease Job suffered from was leprosy, but as the French disease spread across Europe in the 16th century, religious thinkers increasingly started to believe that this was the malady Satan had afflicted with him, that is, the French disease. This provides yet more evidence of the connection early modern Europeans made between religious suffering and the French disease. In addition to the external danger posed by the Ottomans, Western Christians also perceived an internal threat to their religion. The 16th century was an era in which Christianity fractured from within, as a group of reformers led by the German preacher Martin Luther broke off from the Holy Catholic Church and formed their own branch of the religion, which soon came to be known as Protestantism. Protestant propagandists disparaged the Pope, whom they viewed as the Antichrist, and they depicted Luther as the second Elijah, the one who heralded the imminent return of Jesus Christ. Luther himself believed that the end of the world was nigh. Consider the words from a sermon he delivered in 1522, which I've excerpted on this slide. The Protestant Reformation prompted a series of religious upheavals all across Europe, and many of these were incredibly violent and bloody affairs. During the 16th century, a wave of religious wars swept across Europe, the likes of which had never been seen before. Indeed, compared to earlier military conflicts, European wars of the 16th century featured bigger armies, longer battles, and many more casualties and deaths. Protestant rebellions raged across the northern part of the continent especially, and in the entirety of the 1500s, there were only about 10 years of complete peace. The rest, bloodshed. So, the Protestant Reformation of the 1520s and 30s provided a spur to the era's already apocalyptic thinking. By the end of the 1500s, Millenarianism, that is, the belief in a future utopian period that would follow upon the complete destruction of civilization, had completely subsumed the Western mind. Everywhere, people reported increasing numbers of floods, earthquakes, hailstorms, and other natural disasters that seemed to indicate that the earth itself was decaying and dying. And with the degeneration of the earth, Europeans believed that the world was being given over to things completely against nature, including monsters, demons, sorcerers, and witches. In 1531, the German minister Leonhard Breitkopf wrote of what he saw unfolding before his eyes, and I quote, "Nothing but dread and alarm, devils and specters, sorcerers, witches, prodigies, earthquakes, fiery signs in the heavens, three-headed visions in the clouds, and numerous other signs of God's wrath. And these secrets, devilish arts, are multitudinous, and the whole world is deceived with them, so that it is high time the day of judgment came." Notably, it was not only theologians who believed the end of the world had come. So too did some scientists, including the Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe, who, after spying a new comet in 1577, wrote of, quote, how, "In the end, we have to acknowledge that this spectacle from God, the creator of the whole world, has to excite our devout admiration more than anything else in nature, and that it was decided by him in the beginning and now finally shown to the world while it is approaching its evening." Fortunately for us, the world did not end in the 1500s. Yet, this millenarian mood was the intellectual context in which the French disease appeared and started spreading throughout Europe. Given Europeans' pre-existing belief that God was punishing them for their increasingly sinful conduct, it would be difficult to imagine a scenario in which this new mysterious malady didn't get interpreted as yet another sign that the day of judgment was at hand. As this disease ran rampant through European populations, it was interpreted as yet another sign of the coming apocalypse. It was worked into a pre-existing mentality dominated by thoughts of the end of days. These religious preoccupations, in other words, were the cultural concerns that shaped the French disease's construction as a disease of immoral behavior. And these concerns, interestingly, also informed early therapeutic responses to the disease. One of the most popular cures came from the Americas, where Europeans believed the disease to originate. It consisted of a wood called guaiacum, which, when burned, exuded a sweet odor. The treatment required the preparation of a decoction. Shavings of the wood would be soaked in water for about 24 hours and then gently cooked. The scum left behind was used to treat sores on the body, and the water was drunk twice a day at mealtimes. Interestingly, Europeans called this curative substance the holy wood, as they believed God had given it to them as a sign of forgiveness for their sins. All right, I think that does it for now. Next time we meet, we're going to discuss an article on the history of syphilis in the 16th century, so please read that and take a look at the questions I've sent out for it as well. For that conversation, I'll see you all in our discussion board. Later.